Imagine this, it's 1947. In the silent emptiness of the New Mexico desert, something tears across the sky with a light so bright it seems to silence even the wind. A flash, a shockwave, a burnt trail in the sand. And then, a piece of metal that shouldn't exist ends up in the hands of simple locals who could barely believe what they were looking at. And what if I told you that the most famous extraterrestrial encounter in history might have been far more than just an accident? What if, behind the scenes, the United States government raced against time to cover up something that wasn't exactly from this world? So what really fell in Roswell that night? A weather balloon? A top-secret military device? Or the first concrete evidence that we are not alone? Get ready. Today on Urban Secrets, we are revisiting the case that sparked the entire modern UFO fever. A mystery that still haunts deserts, curious minds, and classified files. 1947 was a strange year. The shadows of World War II still loomed over the planet. The United States was testing new devices, spying on rivals, and trying to keep tight control over any information that could threaten national security. The Cold War was just beginning, and the atmosphere was loaded with paranoia, secrecy, and rapid technological advances. At the same time, something unusual was happening in the skies. Reports of flying discs were coming from all across the country. Experienced pilots, police officers, farmers, ordinary people claimed to have seen objects moving in impossible ways. Sharp turns, instant acceleration, maneuvers no human aircraft could perform. The press started using the term flying saucers, kicking off the first major wave of public hysteria around extraterrestrials. But no one could have imagined that a small town in the middle of the New Mexico desert would become the ultimate symbol of this new era of mystery. Roswell, with just under 30,000 residents at the time, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's name. A peaceful community, far from big cities, but very close to something crucial. Highly secretive military bases like White Sands, where nuclear tests and confidential experiments were carried out. In other words, Roswell was the perfect place to be ignored, and the perfect place to hide something important. And it was in this environment of tension, fear, and curiosity that a strange object crashed into the desert, starting a story that still fuels debates, documentaries, theories, and surprising confessions from people who swear they saw the impossible. It was early July 1947. After a powerful storm with loud thunder and unusual lights on the horizon, a rancher named Mac Brazel found something scattered across his property, something unlike anything he had ever seen. And this was a man who knew the desert, who knew the sky, who knew the land. But that was different. Among the bushes and sand were strips of lightweight metallic material, extremely resistant, that didn't burn, didn't bend, and always returned to its original shape, as if it had a memory of its own. There were rods, thin sheets, and strips of something that looked like aluminum foil, but couldn't be destroyed by any fire he knew. Brazel tried to burn it. Nothing. Tried to cut it. Impossible. Tried to bend it. It snapped right back, almost like it was alive. Intrigued, and maybe a little afraid, he gathered a few pieces and took them to the town sheriff. The sheriff, just as puzzled, immediately contacted the Roswell Army Airfield, which sent military personnel to investigate the site. And that's when everything got strange. On July 8th, the airbase released an official statement. Not just any statement, the most shocking admission the US government had ever made on this subject. The local newspaper headline read, "ROF captures a flying saucer on a ranch in the Roswell region." Yes, you heard that right. The United States Army itself announced it had recovered a flying saucer. The news spread like wildfire. Radio stations, newspapers, and curious visitors flooded the town. Roswell became the country's main headline overnight. But then, just 24 hours later, everything changed. Abruptly, the narrative was replaced. The same airbase that had confirmed the flying saucer called a press conference to say it was all a mistake. It wasn't a flying saucer, they said. It was just a weather balloon. They even displayed the remains of a common balloon. Fabric, wood, rubber, as if that was what had been collected. But the witnesses who saw the original material knew very well that those weren't the same objects. And what happened next only made things more suspicious. Mac Brazel was convinced to stay silent. The military sealed off the area. Families who had seen the wreckage were instructed, or threatened, depending on the version, not to talk to anyone. Journalists were pushed away. And then came the darkest part. Over the decades, reports began to emerge of small bodies with large heads and dark eyes found near the crash site. Always from people who had been too afraid to speak earlier. Nurses, former military personnel, retired workers, all describing the same scene. They weren't human, the bodies were burned. But the anatomy was different. I'd never seen anything like it. The army denied everything, of course. But if it was only a weather balloon, why so much secrecy? Why recover the wreckage with armed escorts? Why confiscate testimonies? Why rewrite the official story in less than 24 hours? And the most disturbing question of all, why create increasingly elaborate explanations to justify the incident as the decades passed? As the years went by, the Roswell case became a ghost the US government just couldn't bury. Documents disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Retired military officers spoke up again, some out of guilt, others because, at their age, they felt they had nothing left to lose. Then, in 1994, almost 50 years after the incident, the US Air Force released something unexpected. A report with more than 1,000 pages, trying, once again, to explain what crashed in Roswell. They introduced a brand new version of the story. It wasn't a flying saucer. And it wasn't a simple weather balloon either. But part of a top-secret operation called Project Mogul. An array of experimental balloons designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests using high-altitude microphones. A much more complex explanation than the original denial. And to many people, for that very reason, far more suspicious. According to the report, even the supposed alien bodies witnesses claimed to have seen were actually test dummies used years later in military experiments, and somehow, for some reason, people had confused them with extraterrestrials. But there was a huge problem with that story. Those dummies only started being used 6 years after Roswell. So how could witnesses in 1947 have seen something that didn't even exist until the early 1950s? Nothing added up. And this is where the case becomes something much bigger. Because instead of shutting the debate down, the report only fueled more distrust. Journalists, UFO researchers, former military personnel, even respected scientists started to notice a pattern. The more they try to explain Roswell, the more unexplainable it becomes. Witnesses, like Major Jesse Marcel, one of the first military men to handle the debris, insisted until his death that what he saw wasn't human technology. He described lightweight, flexible, indestructible materials unlike anything produced on Earth at the time. And if that wasn't strange enough, another detail surfaced decades later, a second crash site. According to several independent accounts, the object didn't fall in one piece, it broke apart mid-air. One piece landed on Mac Brazel's ranch, but another piece supposedly crashed miles away, where the bodies were allegedly found. This second site, witnesses say, was locked down by the military immediately. Everything removed before sunrise. And nothing, absolutely nothing, left behind. This is where the case reaches its most unsettling point. There's more evidence suggesting something was recovered than evidence suggesting nothing happened at all. Roswell isn't just a case from 1947, it's a symbol, maybe the symbol of modern ufology. After Roswell, flying saucers became part of culture. The US government launched secret investigation programs. Ordinary people started looking at the sky not with fear, but with curiosity. Roswell marked the beginning of an era of suspicion, unanswered questions, hidden files, and a lingering feeling that something out there still escapes our understanding. What's most fascinating is that, even with all the reports, documentaries, confessions, and revisions, one truth remains. No one has ever proved definitively what fell in the New Mexico desert. And maybe that's exactly why the case survives. Because some secrets don't belong to governments or military agencies. They belong to human imagination, to our need to understand who we are, and whether we're or aren't alone. And until the truth finally comes out, Roswell will remain one of those mysteries that cross generations, sparking whispers, debates, and quiet glances at the night sky. After all, if something crashed in Roswell, maybe something is still watching today.